Kia ora, Chris from NIWA here with this seasonal climate outlook. This is for the autumn season. This is March, April, and May as a collective. We're going to dive into the detail. So let's let you know what you need to know, starting with our headlines. Now, for most, it will be a dry start to the autumn season. First half of March is looking pretty darn dry. It doesn't mean it won't rain. There will be some rain, but generally speaking, it's going to be low. I think in the second half of March, especially late in March into April, we'll see if we can get some changes. More on that in a moment. And in spite of those changes, the dryness may linger for quite a while. In fact, dryness could be a theme for the 3-month period for parts of the country. And yes, it'll be a cool start. We are going to see a puff of cool air for cool temperatures will be the theme for the next for the first couple of weeks, I should say, of autumn. But then it looks like things will trend warmer. Right, so let's let you know what you need to know. We start with temperature. So temperature for the next 3 months likely to be above average for much of the country. The exception, eastern parts, and let me get rid of myself here. Full frame, there we go. Eastern parts of both islands likely to see about equal chances for either average or above average temperatures. Look, put differently, if there are two areas in New Zealand where the confidence for above average temperatures aren't quite so high, it is in these areas. So we're thinking the odds, again, for average or above average temperatures are about equal. Above average temperatures for the rest of the country. It doesn't mean every day will be warmer than average. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, coming back on screen, there will be some cool periods the first half of March. So that's an example of having a period of time that's incongruent with the broader outlook as a whole. What about rainfall? Look, let's start with the dry areas. So we think western areas of both islands have a higher risk for dryness. So that's why we've labeled these areas as about equal chances for near normal or below normal rainfall, about equal chances. So somewhere normal to below normal, somewhere in that spectrum. Now for the east of both islands, as I disappear again, we are thinking about equal chances for normal or above normal. That is largely due to, we think, easterly winds, easterly quarter, so that's anywhere from south of east to north of east. That will be a theme. It may not be a dominant theme, but that will happen more than usual, and that may bring about enhanced chances for rainfall. That same wind, when it crosses the central part of both islands, that becomes a drier wind, and that's why we have dryness as one of the areas or one of the outcomes that could be favored, I should say, in these areas. Now, for the north of the North Island and the north of the South Island, near normal rainfall is expected. So let's go back, and we're going to start things off with more of a weather outlook, and then we'll get into the longer term. So we start off with our pressure anomaly. So as we know, if you don't, if you're a first-time viewer, first of all, welcome. If you're a long-time viewer, thank you. But red on this map means high pressure. High pressure, basically settled weather, dry weather. And where you see blue, that is where low pressure and lousy weather, unsettled weather, is likely to occur. So we are recording this on the 3rd day of March. It is Monday. So we're thinking as we work our way into Tuesday, Wednesday, a bit of a low off the eastern portion of the North Island. That will give the threat of showers and rain to eastern areas of the North Island. So this will also bring cooler temperatures. In fact, look at this temperature anomaly. So this is showing where temperatures are likely to be either colder than average or warmer than average. And where you see the blue, that's colder than average. And make no mistake, look, by Tuesday, Wednesday, especially Wednesday, much of the country is seeing a below average signal. The exception, the west of the South Island, where we could see temperatures near average or even above average. So for the first full week of March, it will be certainly a cool theme across the country. That does eventually fade away. We see off to the west some warm air kind of pooling over Australia. That looks like it'll make its way to our neck of the woods, but not until as we get closer to the middle part of March. So the first 10 days or so, maybe even 2 weeks of March, looking to be cool, and that shows it right there. Going back to the pressure map, look, once this low moves away, we're going to see more in the way of rain. By the way, this is a tropical cyclone that'll be impacting Brisbane, not affecting New Zealand. That is Alfred. We talked about that last week. You can see as we go through time, eventually that low pulls away, so that as we are beginning the second full week of March, we see high pressure moving back in, and that means settled weather. And that high, 10th of March, forecast to be right over smack dab New Zealand. There'll be some chilly mornings, some bright, sunny, warm days. In fact, what does that mean for rainfall? Well, this is week 2. Week 2. So basically 7 days starting on the 8th of March. So basically 8th of March to the 14th of March. So this is week 2 of March. And look, it is dry just about everywhere. The exception, remember that low I showed you off the east coast? Let's bring it back here. So you can see 8th right there, 9th. There could be some leftover moisture hitting that area, the east of the North Island. Hence, that's one area where there may be an absence of dryness, let's call it that. But look, it is dry. It is forecast to be dry week 2 across pretty much the entire country. Week 3, it doesn't get much better. The dryness not as profound, but still, and that's because it's lighter brown, not the darker brown. But you can see dryness for much of the South Island. We could see some westerlies, so there may be a bit of rain, perhaps normal rainfall for this particular week. So once again, this is the 15th and 7 days from the 15th, so that puts us around the 23rd of March. So this is smack dab in the middle of March. Dry for the upper North Island, dry for much of the North Island, bar maybe the central part. And as we continue, we can, starting the 23rd. So this takes us right, this is basically the last week of March. We said earlier, maybe the end of March, there could be some signs of moisture. Well, there are some signs the upper North Island could see some abundant rainfall. Look, this is 4 weeks out. We'll see if this happens, but this is the theme being indicated, and dryness for much of the South Island. If we want to go really far out, you can see that wetness is something we'll have to watch for a good chunk of the eastern South Island, especially the lower half of the eastern South Island. With near normal rainfall, that's, I guess, the white coloring we're looking at for much of the country. Some spotty areas of dryness possible. This would be from the 30th of March to roughly April 6th or April 5th. So this takes us into the first handful of days of April. So let's talk about dryness. Where is it dry right now? New Zealand Drought Index. As you can see, it's dry in a lot of spots, particularly for the North Island. So what we can do, we're going to go to the North Island and just have them move around. So we're actually looking at meteorological drought in parts of the Northland region, up near Kaipara. So up near Dargaville, there is meteorological drought occurring. That's the deeper red you see here. But even around that, as we kind of zoom in and move around a little bit, you can see that there is significant dryness in the form of extremely dry conditions and very dry conditions across much of the country, much of the North Island, I should say, down into the Waikato. We're talking Hamilton. We're talking down toward the Taranaki region. And yeah, there are some areas of meteorological drought now reemerging, far eastern Taranaki and the western portion of, say, our northern portions of the Manawatu and southwest areas of the Waikato. So extremely dry conditions with some pockets of meteorological drought. And that dryness continues all the way down into areas toward getting close to the Wellington area, where, strictly speaking, they are in dry conditions, but very dry conditions from about Kapiti Coast north, right along the coastline into Taranaki and into the central part of the North Island. Notice over the eastern parts, not nearly as dry, though there is a bit of dryness emerging right now over toward Napier. Marlborough, yep, some dryness there. Likewise, toward Greymouth, we are seeing dry to very dry conditions across that area. And continuing our trek south, you can see we have widespread dryness around Queenstown and to the north over areas that are notoriously wet this time of the year. We're looking at very dry, even some pockets there of extremely dry conditions, and that dryness does continue into Milford Sound. Also parts of coastal Southland around Invercargill and all the way up. Now getting into Dunedin, we are seeing some pockets of dryness in that area. So that is the situation for the next 5 weeks. As I mentioned, just a quick review of what to expect for the next 5 weeks. We are thinking that we will find dryness for much of the month of March. As we get toward the end of the month of March, we're hoping for some, increased opportunities for rainfall for the upper portion of the North Island, and especially areas that could use it in parts of the Taranaki region, maybe parts of the Manawatu. We could see a better chance for some meaningful rainfall as we get closer to basically say the end of the last week of March, start of April. Now it's time to go into the weeds a little bit. Real quick before going into the weeds, just that summary. Above normal rainfall or near normal rainfall, about equal chances for eastern parts as I disappear. For the North Island, eastern North Island, eastern South Island. Look, I want to say this clearly. We're not saying it's going to be above normal rainfall, just that if there is an area where above normal rainfall is to occur, we think the best odds will be in these areas. But those odds, the confidence, I should say, not high. So we're basically putting it somewhere between normal and above normal. Dryness, our biggest concern for dryness over the next 3 months will be Taranaki, the western part of both islands, Taranaki, Manawatu, maybe down in the central plateau, down toward Wellington, as well as much of the the western South Island. Now, the North Island, at the moment, dryness is a concern, but as we work our way through the autumn season, we think that rainfall chances will increase, and hopefully that eases the dryness. It should be mentioned, as I come back on screen, that once we start to get regular rain, it will take time to kind of get things back to normal. First, the soils have to get saturated. Then eventually that works its way into the streams, into the rivers. So it takes a sustained period of regular rainfall to really turn things around. So what is driving things? Well, we talked about La Nina before. Let's keep talking about it. So let's put our cursor on. Let's clear that off. So let's make that a little larger. So we are still looking at cooler than average ocean temperatures over the equatorial Pacific. And this is La Nina. But we are seeing warmer than average ocean temperatures off South America. I believe it's called El Niño Costera, which basically means a coastal El Niño. And we are looking at some warmer than average temperatures around Papua New Guinea, north of Australia, what we call the maritime continent. And this setup is basically a central-based La Nina. Motoki. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It's a Japanese word that means basically similar but different. So there has been La Nina, it's just been a bit different. And because of these areas of warmth that we're seeing, particularly off the eastern coast or the eastern Pacific off the coast of South America, that will also have an influence in our weather. So we're not going to experience, or our expectation is not to experience consistent easterly quarter winds. They'll be interspersed with anticyclonic flows, high pressure flows because of that. The other thing I should mention is what's happening at depth. So I'll take this off. So we're looking here. What you're looking at here is basically just the top of the ocean, the skin as we call it. But imagine going to an aquarium, maybe Kelly Tarleton's, and you're looking at a huge aquarium. This is what this is. Except we're looking at it this side here. So here's our date line. Right here's our date line. Let me get my mouse over here. So this is our international date line. Notice along and especially to the west, we have a lot of warm water at depth. This has to go somewhere, and this is something we're going to be watching over the next several months. Does this go farther east and move toward the top of the ocean over several months? Does that mean we have maybe El Nino coming next year? Possible. That seems unlikely. Or does it stay put and we start to see maybe a second dip of La Nina as we work our way into, say, September, October, November? That's an emerging scenario that we're watching. But nonetheless, you can plainly see there is cooler than usual ocean temperatures at the surface and at the depth underneath the surface, down to about 100, 150 meters. You can also see some of those pockets of really warm water off the coast of South America. So this is an area we'll have to watch as you work your way through the coming weeks and months. How does this warm water, particularly at depth, how does this behave? Because this will be driving the atmosphere as we work our way through the next several months. I want to show you one thing that's quite interesting, and this is velocity potential. So velocity potential basically is the atmosphere responding to the ocean temperatures. And look, it's not a coincidence that you see here in this region, so this is along the equator, and if you just use our imagination, here's New Zealand, right? So if we go due north and to the east, that's where this cooler than average ocean temperature is located at the surface anyway. Let's go back to this map. So what this is what we call velocity potential. If you've been watching this before, you know what this is. We're looking at the very top of the atmosphere, and we're trying to understand where there's going to be significant lift or significant sink. Where you see the warm colors, like right here, that is sink. So if you're looking for rainfall, you don't want sink, you want lift. Here, it's a basic principle of weather is this. In order to get rain, in order to get clouds, air must go up. You got to have rising air. And so we look for air that is favorable to rise and favorable to sink. And this gives us a good indication, especially farther out, where those pockets or areas of rise and sink are likely to emerge. And guess what? They're connected to the ocean temperatures. This is really related to the Walker circulation. So it's no coincidence we see this sink in March. And this has been here pretty much since late spring, early summer, this sink north of New Zealand and maybe to the east. And if we go back to our ocean temperatures, once again, here's New Zealand looking to the north along the equator. Yep, north of New Zealand and to the east. So it jives. It makes sense. And here's what I'm watching. So here's March. Here's April. Here's May. Here's June. Here's July. Look, man, for the next several months, to one extent or another, this sink is forecast to persist. Yes, it does kind of bounce around. March and April look pretty darn similar, don't they? We go to May, pretty similar, a slight trend to the west toward Papua New Guinea. And then as we get to winter, June, we see a really strong sinking signal. Look, what this is telling me is that having reliable and regular connections to the tropics in terms of a moisture source, that seems pretty darn unlikely. There are some signs that we could see some rising areas of rising air favored to our northeast. If that happens, perhaps we could see this as a source of moisture as we work our way into winter, June, and especially July. There we can see some evidence in June, but really it starts to pop in July. So we may need to wait till winter, June or July, if our airflows can come from the north and northeast. That would be a source of tropical moisture. And if we're going to get big rainfall events, it needs to come from the subtropics and tropics. It's as simple as that. Yes, of course, you can get rain from weather systems to the south. There's no doubt about it. But it's the big stuff, or the heavy, beefy stuff, for lack of a better term. We need connections to the tropics. And this is telling us where the lift is forecast to be. And notice as I go back over to the north, again, is that a coincidence? Let's look at our ocean temperatures. Oh gosh, look at that. There's warmer than average temperatures around Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and northern parts of Australia. It is not a coincidence that we see this profound lift or rise in the atmosphere co-located. That is not a coincidence. That is there for a reason. It's on purpose. And if we go into April, we still see that, though it does diminish. So from a first principles perspective, I don't see much change in March and maybe even to early April in terms of the broader weather pattern. Not much in the way of big rainfall events from the north. I suppose we could still get the odd rainfall event that gives us a good drop of rain from the north. Sure, that is possible. I know I'm recording this, and Mother Nature may come up with a big rain event at the very end of March, and somebody says, well, Chris, you said there wouldn't be any big rain events. No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that the odds for these things are really low. They're not zero, but they're quite low. And if we continue that sink persists into May. So for the autumn season, this is why we're expecting a dry lean for parts of the country. Easterly winds at times, that'll favor as I disappear. You're probably thinking, hurrah. Easterly winds at times, that will favor the chance of enhanced rainfall for eastern parts of both islands. So if there is going to be heavy rainfall events, perhaps those areas are favored. Doesn't mean they can't happen anywhere else, just that they're favored there. So, yeah, coming back on screen, this is something that we're going to be watching as we work away through the autumn season. What happens with our ocean temperatures and how does the atmosphere respond? So we had a lot to unpack there. That's it for me. If you want a complete read of the seasonal climate outlook, just head to niwa.co.nz. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time. I'm NIWA forecaster Chris Brandolino. Namahi Nui.